Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Bay Area UU Church. I'm Reverend Katie McQuage-Loukas, and my pronouns are she and hers. And full disclosure, I am not sick, but my partner is at home sniffling. So I'm wearing a mask so that I don't breathe on any of you, because if I get sick tomorrow, I'll feel really badly about it. But so far, so good on my end. So with that out of the way, whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived this morning in body or mind or spirit, whether you've come to us here in person or you're joining us online, you are welcome here, and we are glad that you are here. We join together in this moment to shift, to put ourselves into a different state of mind and a different state of being. We bring with us our open minds, our open hearts, and our open hands. So let us open our hearts and minds and take a deep breath together. And let us begin to create our sacred time and space together. Come, let us worship.
Good morning. This morning, Joseph Stromberg has agreed to light our chalice while I read Still There Is Hope by Nadine McSpadden. During our darkest moments, still there is hope. When facing our biggest challenges, still there is hope. When all we can do is put one foot in front of the other, still there is hope. When we can't find the way out, still there is hope. When all we can do to help is hold someone's hand as they cry, still there is hope. We are the hope for ourselves and for one another. Always there is hope. Please rise as you are able and willing, and join us in singing the song, There Is More Love Somewhere, verses 1 through 4. We gather in religious community, connected not by a common creed, but by the promise and commitment we make to live together in freedom and faith. Our church covenant is a statement of how we hope to be in this world, a proclamation of the aspirations and affirmations we share for creating a society defined by compassion and love. The words are based on historic statements of faith written by the late 19th century Unitarian James Villa Blake and 20th century Universalist L. Griswold Adams. Please join me in saying our shared promise to be together in a spirit of faith, freedom, and commitment. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, thus to be covenant with one another.
Our responsive reading this morning is number 584 in the Gray Hymnal, A Network of Mutuality, from Martin Luther King. Again, that's number 584. Please join in with me in the italicized words. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that. We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lonely deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war. One day, we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. We shall hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope.
any of the young and the young at heart want to come up for the reading, you're welcome. Today's book is When Things Aren't Right, Go Left. One day, for no particular reason, nothing was going right. Absolutely, positively, nothing was going right. So, I decided to go left. The first thing I did, I left behind my worries. Yep, I left them right there on the ground. They looked up at me and wondered, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" But I just smiled and I waved goodbye. "Wait," they hollered, "come back. What will happen to us?" I simply shrugged my shoulders. "You'll be fine." As I walked away, I thought, did I make the right choice? Should I go back and get them? Then doubts crept in. So you know what I did? I left behind my doubts. Yep, I left them right there on the ground. They bellowed, "You're making a mistake. You're making a huge mistake." But I just gazed up at the sky. They questioned, "Are you sure you're making the right decision?" "Absolutely," I declared. With my worries and my doubts left behind, I could finally think clearly. I forged on until I came to a pool and a diving board that I remembered all too well. The last time I tried to dive off that diving board, I splatted on my back. Ouch. I remembered the pain and how scared I was, and I started thinking, maybe I shouldn't try that again. So you know what I did? I left behind my fears. Yep, I left them right there on the ground. They screamed, "Don't do it, please don't do it." I stood up straight, my shoulders back, hands pressed way above my head. "Stop," they cried. But I simply turned, gave them a wink, and leaped, splat, on my back once again. Ooh, that stings. I thought to myself, this is impossible. It can't be done. So you know what I did? I left behind my frustrations. Yep, I left them right there on the ground. They yelled, "You can't do it." Again, I stood up, shoulders back, hands pressed above my head, and they laughed. "Just give up already." I whispered to myself, "No way, never." And I leaped, feet together, toes pointed, legs straight. Perfect, I did it. I started to realize that the more left I went, the more right I felt. So you know what I did? Yep, I kept going left. And before I knew it, everything was going right. As I walked home, I glanced at the ground and I noticed something that I did not expect. My frustrations were a lot smaller. My fears were a lot quieter. My doubts a lot calmer. My worries practically gone. And so I decided to pick them back up. And you know what? They felt lighter now, and they weren't so hard to handle anymore. And I realized it's okay to have them with me, so long as I keep an eye on them and made sure that they didn't get too big or too loud or too overwhelming. But if they did, and I felt like nothing was going right again, then I'd simply go left.
Thank you, Lisa. Alrighty. Let's see, the keeper of the flame is Stella Stromberg. We're keeping it in the family. Join me in saying,
When we gather on Sundays, we bring with us all of our cares that linger from the week behind us and all of our worries for the week ahead. We come holding in our hearts precious milestones, moments where our lives have changed. We bring our joys and our sorrows here, and we know that others in this room have sorrowed, others have rejoiced, and that we are never alone. We light our first candle today for Mary Margaret Carlyle, who died Friday afternoon. Many of you will remember her well from the choir, from community meals, and through her poetry. And may this candle's light also hold Leo and all of Mary's friends and family as we join them in sorrow and loss. I invite you to come forward now to light your own candle for yourself or for a loved one, for a hope, for a worry, a milestone, a joy, or a sorrow. Whatever you bring with you this morning, know that we will witness it and help you hold it for a time. We've lit one final candle for all not with us this morning, for all who are traveling, for all of you who are watching online with us this morning, and for those who live in our memory. You too are held in our hearts, our thoughts, and our prayers. I invite you now to pray with me. Infinite mystery, in whom we live, move, and have our being, help us to open to the knowledge of the holy. Help us to sense it in the ordinariness of our days, in sunshine and in wind, in rain and in darkness, in all the seasons of our lives. May those among us today with grieving hearts find comfort here. May those among us today in need of healing and support find some part of it here. May those who do not have enough find some measure of abundance. May those of us with whole and open hearts be able to share our love. May those of us with strength use it to help others. May those of us living in abundance share our abundance with those in need. May we remember always that it is our hands that do the work of justice, our voices that speak words of kindness, and our open hearts that lead the world toward peace, justice, and fairness for all. Amen, and may it be so. Please remain seated for our meditation hymn, Filled with Loving Kindness.
Thank you. It's beautiful. Our reading today is called Futility Refuted by Jeffrey A. Lockwood. There is no such thing as a lasting peace, a tranquility that will persist forever, a final resting place for the lion and the lamb. We yearn for the completion of our task, the fulfillment of our striving, the consummation of our journey. And this longing sows the seeds of our defeat. We aspire to solve conflicts. We ache to be done with the hard work of life. We pine for the day in which an everlasting peace prevails. In believing that the purpose of a peace movement lies in securing an outcome, in reaching an amicable conclusion, in attaining a serene world, we assure our own frustration, our own futility, and ultimately our own failure. The work of peacemaking will never be done. That is the curse and the blessing of being human. It's a curse in that there is no utopian culmination of our labors, a blessing in that we will always have meaningful work. The peacemaker is like Sisyphus, whom the gods condemned to eternal life of shoving a boulder up a hill, only to see it roll back down again in an endless cycle of apparent futility. How could Sisyphus endure such a fate? I've asked my students, and their answers were revealing. Some students supposed that there is always hope, a hope that the gods will relent, that peace will finally come to Sisyphus and perhaps to us. A particularly creative student suggested that over time, the rolling of the boulder would erode the hill so that eventually the labor of Sisyphus would be complete. Maybe as we roll the boulder of peace in every generation, the hill of hate is worn down. But I believe that the most compelling answer came from those students who understood that a sense of futility comes from the belief that we rightfully expect to see the fruit of our labors. We forget that virtue lies in the doing of good works, not in the completing of our task. Maybe Sisyphus will never recover the graces of the god. Maybe the hill will never be worn down. But if we can authentically and deeply engage in our labors, if we roll the boulder of peace because it is what we are called to do, if the measure of our work is its capacity to shape who we are, we can go on pushing. And it is in the course of our labors, the hill of hate is eroded. That will be a beautiful thing, a very beautiful thing. But as much as we hope that peacemaking will replace warmongering, as much as we hope to live at a critical point in human history, as much as we dream of glorious conversion of society, we must understand that while epiphanies may change souls, they rarely change the world. To know what we can do, to understand what the world needs of us, we must look into the eyes of the frightened soldier and the terrified child. But to sustain our work, we must look inside ourselves. There we shall find the understanding that the endless labor of life is not about changing the world, but about creating ourselves. We cannot make the world peaceful, but neither can the world make us hopeless. From A Guest of the World, Meditations by Jeffrey Lockwood. Thank you.
Yesterday, November 11th, is the day set aside to honor Saint Martin of Tours. And Martin was born into the landed gentry, the minor gentry of Rome. And he had to perform his military service as a young man. Supposedly, he was riding one day and he saw a beggar on the side of the road shivering with cold. And with the impulsive generosity of people who become saints, he tore his cloak in half and shared it. Later that night, he dreamed that Christ came to him wrapped in half a cloak. At that point, he decided he was a Christian and that he could no longer kill. Rather than desert his post, he volunteered to ride unarmed, accompanying his fellow cavalrymen without participating in violence himself. Negotiators came to sue for peace, and he escaped the battle and was discharged, and then went about his saintly business, founding monasteries, serving as bishop, all of the things that saints do in the 4th, 3rd century. He left behind a relic, supposedly his half of the cloak, and it was retained by the Frankish kings. The little cloak, the capella they called it, was guarded by people who became known as the capellani. And these are the origins of our word for chapel and chaplain. Chaplains are non-combatants. They do not bear arms, but they accompany soldiers nevertheless. Amid the violence of war, they are the presence of something else, something other, the possibility of a more peaceful life. In late 1918, the Central Powers of Europe were collapsing. Bulgaria signed their armistice in September, the Ottoman Empire at the end of October, and Austria-Hungary on November 3rd. At the same time, the German Navy was in full revolt, and Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated on November 9th. German negotiators had already arrived in France when they received the news, as well as orders to sign a truce, even if conditions could not be negotiated. The signatories agreed to terms and signed at 5 o'clock in the morning on November 11th, with an effective start time of 11 o'clock, 6 hours. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns fell silent. In Breakfast of Champions, Kurt Vonnegut writes, "It was during that minute in 1918 that millions upon millions of human beings stopped butchering one another. I have talked to old men who were on battlefields during that minute. They have told me in one way or another that the sudden silence was the voice of God. And so we still have among us some men who can remember clearly when God spoke to mankind." As an example of the absurdity of human nature and the futility sometimes of our efforts, during that gap from 5 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock, the moment the armistice went into effect, the war continued. Even after word was spread and people were standing by, they were attempting to cross here, charge there, and firing their artillery so that they did not have to bring it back with them. Deaths are recorded right up until the appointed moment, and fighting endured on the farther flung reaches of the conflict until word finally arrived in those places. But nevertheless, at 11 o'clock, the guns finally fell silent. After years of pounding artillery, after years of blood soaking the ground, it all stopped. The armistice had to be renewed several times until the final treaties were negotiated. But that moment of silence is what lives in memory as the moment the war ended. The early Remembrance Day celebrations in Britain, France, and other places were not victory celebrations, but days of mourning. 2 minutes of silence at 11 o'clock, where the whole world stopped, trains, commerce, everything. People laid wreaths for the dead, and likely for some, they took a moment to reckon with the horrors they now carried with them, the terrible things they had witnessed and could never unsee. In the years after the war, a pacifist movement coalesced around Armistice Day, particularly in Britain, but in many of the countries affected by the war. Pacifist groups distributed and wore white poppies to go alongside or replace the red. In any war remembrance, there's a danger of glorifying militarism and victory, and the white poppies have historically served as a counter-narrative, one that reminds us of the horrors of war. This year, there was increased demand for white poppies, particularly among those calling for a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza. During that First World War, people sneered and tormented religious objectors. Some objectors could, in some places, serve their country in another capacity, but many refused to do even that, not wanting to lend any support whatever to the war effort. Some, particularly the Quakers, formed medical units. The Friends Ambulance Unit reminds me a bit of St. Martin, riding into hell not to engage with violence, but to somehow meet the need of the moment without losing integrity. The oaths Martin had sworn conflicted with his newfound commitment to Christianity, and both of these were real and true commitments. His resolution to ride unarmed sounds novel, but it is how many choose to live out their dual commitments to nonviolence and to their nation. There are veterans who, after returning home, after a diagnosis of PTSD and after extensive treatment, do not have symptoms that interfere with daily living, but who do describe a lingering spiritual pain from what they have seen and done. The scars of war are physical, mental, and emotional, but they are also wounds to the spirit. Sometimes these wounds are of shame and moral failure, but often the wound remains painful and unhealed because there is no right answer. The injury to the spirit is not merely that a wrong was committed, but that there was no way to avoid wrongdoing. Moral dissonance is the sense that there can be no clarity, that there are competing and equally valid moral needs. And when that dissonance reaches a point of stress or crisis, that is when we face a moral dilemma. We must act and choose which value we will uphold at the expense of another value. And the aftermath of this decision leaves a wound. The ancient world understood this. Those they sent to fight in battle, or those they set in places of political power, they knew that these people would make decisions in morally ambiguous circumstances, or even that they would commit terrible deeds on behalf of others. In order to return to society, particularly for returning soldiers, there was a need for a spiritual ritual cleansing. The society that sent people to fight acknowledged that they too were responsible, and they performed rituals of lament and cleansing so that the returning soldiers could reintegrate into society. In some ways, I'm sure this made it easier for the ancient Greeks to vote for war. I'm not sure it's harder to vote for war now, given that it is rarely those who cast the vote who go to fight. And often our wars are fought in the name of those who would rather have peace, and they're fought with our tax dollars too. There are thousands of years of philosophy, theology, and legal analysis that try to parse the necessity of violence. This is not a question that has been resolved in those thousands of years, and not a question that can be resolved in a way that satisfies everyone. But regardless, we must always remember the cost of war. The dead, those wounded in body, those injured in spirit. And we as citizens must ask if there is a possibility that this price could lead to something worthwhile. The classical principles of the just war include a just cause, the last resort, having a reasonable chance of accomplishing something, and proportionate means to accomplish that end. As Unitarian Universalists, we don't necessarily take a particular position on how just wars work and when violence might be an appropriate response or method, though we do occasionally take positions on specific issues. I myself am not a pacifist. I believe that there are times when nonviolence and non-resistance may, in fact, uphold the status quo and contribute to further violence. The refusal to personally participate in the violence of war can come to feel like complicity in other forms of violence. And so the central question for us as people of faith is to ask in which particular situation and in which moment what could possibly move us closer to beloved community. In many ways, the beloved community is a dream. It's an ideal and one that will never be quite real. but only because nothing could ever be perfect. We can still move toward it by holding before us our ideals and our decision-making. And to that end, even though I do think these are utopian visions, I think it is wise to spend some time with the dreamers and the idealists of our Unitarian Universalist tradition. John Haynes Holmes left the American Unitarian Association, or was pushed out, in 1918, when he refused to support the American war effort. Throughout that war, and during the war that followed, he retained a commitment to absolute pacifism, although his optimism took a battering. At the time, the vast majority of Unitarians were in favor of going to war, even his own congregation. But his own congregation also favored freedom of conscience and freedom of the pulpit. He came to oppose war and violence out of his reading of the gospel. And while some among us here might follow him through that path, through the gospel, or through some other spiritual commitment, I would also add another of his reasons. He says, war and democracy are incompatible. When war comes, democracy goes. Already in our own country, before the beginning of war, the work of militarism is underway. Already freedom of thought is being denied and liberty of conscience challenged. So long as I have breath to speak or hand to lift a pen, I will oppose this monstrous thing. The second minister and theologian I would mention today is Aidan Ballou, an abolitionist and a theorist of what he came to call non-resistance. I could, and probably will at some point because I find him very interesting, delve into his principles, but the quotation I want to bring to us today is this: non-resistance alone makes it possible to tear out evil by the root. To offend another because he offended us is to repeat an evil deed, to encourage the very demon we claim we wish to expel. Satan cannot be driven out by Satan, untruth cannot be cleansed by untruth, and evil cannot be vanquished by evil. What Ballou advocated for instead was what he called moral suasion. He argued that hearts and spirits had to actually be reshaped, not merely beaten into submission. As an abolitionist and non-resistor, he opposed the Civil War on the grounds that war might perhaps change laws about slavery, but it would never change the hearts. And I suspect that argument makes people somewhat uncomfortable, and I know it makes me uncomfortable because I look at the world today and I suspect that he was correct. He was the last one standing at the time of the Civil War among all the abolitionist pacifists. The rest had left him to go fight for war and argue for it, but until his death, he remained absolutely committed to the idea that only changing hearts and minds and spirits would actually change the way we live together. Ballou greatly inspired Leo Tolstoy, the grandfather of Christian anarchism, and Tolstoy inspired Gandhi, who inspired John Haynes Holmes, both of whom inspired Martin Luther King, and now we have come full circle. One of the great perils of being a Unitarian Universalist, and probably of being any kind of religious liberal, is the tremendous desire to be right. We can say over and over again that there are no correct theological answers, but when it comes to social issues, cultural issues, and politics, we do think that there is a right answer, and we want to be very sure that we have it before we speak aloud. Nancy MacDonald Ladd calls this the will to perfection, a will to be personally justified, a will to be effective, and in the end, through all our carefully calibrated strategies, a will to win the game that was never meant to be a game at all. She reminds us that the burden of our faith is that there is no external force that impels us to violence. There is no demon, no devil, just us and our own nature as human beings. In our struggles for life and liberty, it is natural, that is to say, it is part of human nature to reach for violence as a tool. And Nancy MacDonald Ladd says that human beings do not fall from grace, but to violence. As someone who definitely wants to be absolutely correct in all things, it is important for me to remember that sometimes there is not actually a correct answer. There are competing needs, competing goals, competing challenges, and competing legitimate moral values, all of which have some measure of legitimacy, and all of which are flawed. There's a quote about preaching commonly attributed to Karl Barth where he says, "You have to hold the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other." And it's a tidied up version of the quote. The original one reminds preachers to interpret the newspaper through the Bible. And I think that the UU equivalent of that is to remember the difference between me, Katie, standing around with coffee talking politics, and my role as a minister, which I hope is to offer perspective and perhaps a framework about how to think about politics without propounding particular answers. Because there aren't correct answers, just a bunch of complicated ones. Because the world is complicated. Because we meet each moment, each decision, each event with real values in real conflict. So while there are things that feel like absolutes, like right and wrong, how those things actually manifest in our lives are not so absolute. And I say this not to absolve us of making decisions or acting. I do think that choosing to disengage is in itself a choice, and one that can be complicit with violence. I actually say this to encourage us. If we can be freed from absolutism and a desire to be perfect, perhaps that empowers us to choose the next right thing and the thing after that. Perhaps it will free us from indecision, from fearing to choose the wrong thing and then choosing nothing at all. When we acknowledge that silence will produce the same moral injury, carries the same risk that action carries, perhaps we will be less afraid to speak and to act. In the weeks following September 11th, I sometimes felt as if I were in some alternate reality. It seemed so obvious and clear to me that going to war would not solve anything. And President Bush was saying you are either with us or with the terrorists. And only one member of Congress had the courage to vote against the war authorization, Barbara Lee of California. And I think it has been conclusively proven that the Bush administration never seriously considered a non-military response to 9/11. The administration issued literally impossible demands, such as turning over every single terrorist, because, we have them on a list. And the administration refused attempts by the Taliban to turn bin Laden over to a neutral third country, and then the United States began bombing. The war in Afghanistan, as I remember it in the media, was presented as the logical and natural response to 9/11 and the obvious solution to terrorism. If one includes the tangential and related post-9/11 war zones, such as Pakistan and Yemen, Syria, and of course, Iraq, the total footprint might be something like 1 million lives lost, trillions of dollars spent, the destruction of I know not how much infrastructure, and for what? I see similar dynamics unfolding now in Gaza. The rhetoric is as if the only possible response to Hamas terror is warfare. Similar dehumanizing and absolutist rhetoric will allow for the same unspeakable levels of civilian casualties that I remember. Democracy was already under threat from the right, and now there are reprisals against those who speak for peace, regardless of what side they may speak from. Freedom of thought is denied and liberty of conscience challenged. There is also a lack of an end game. How does this war end? What happens after? There is no clear and obvious agenda, which I think means the answer will be, as it was in Afghanistan, ongoing violence without clear aims. I hesitate to make a decision on whether the cause itself is just, but I am willing to say that it is disproportionate, that this was nowhere near a last resort. And much like the war on terror, it is not clear to me what the conditions of success are. And I know something of what it means to have a government act in my name, with my tax dollars, to wreak destruction on those I do not think deserve it. And I mention that now because it is still my tax dollars, billions of dollars in military aid. And I know that no one cares in the government of the United States or of Israel about Katie McQuage-Loukas' or Thomas Aquinas' complex moral calculus about just war theory. But regardless of whether or not anyone there is listening, for myself I must speak. Untruth cannot be cleansed by untruth, and evil cannot be vanquished by evil. Hamas's acts of violence changed no minds or hearts about the liberation of Palestinians. Israel's response also changed no minds or hearts. None of this violence will lead to peace or to freedom or justice, only vengeance and more death. Perpetrators and victims alike will bear moral wounds, as will witnesses and bystanders. As anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are inflamed worldwide, violence is rising here and in other countries as the most hateful elements of our politics seize this moment to their advantage. In war, violence and hatred become a contagion. This cannot continue. Too many people, the vast majority of them innocent, are dying. And the ones doing the killing may or may not want to be doing that, and the ones who survive don't want any part of this either, and nothing about this will lead to peace. To choose sides, to decide one life matters more than another, or to attempt to balance the numbers somehow is also a moral failure. The only possible choice is the one that leads to a better world, and the only possible side is justice. I join with the UUA in their recent resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire and de-escalation, the release of hostages, and protection for civilians. Amid the guns and the bombs, there's no possibility that anyone there could hear the voice of God. Whatever solutions are to be found must first be found in the end of hostilities and the end of violence. And so today, I'd like us to hold the traditional 2 members of silence to remember the armistice of 1918, but also to hold in our hearts grief, lamentation, and hope for the possibility of something more just, to a lasting peace that goes deeper than a mere cessation of hostilities. ceasefire in 1918 also did not lead to a lasting peace. It took another war and another treaty, and it took decades of rebuilding of infrastructure, rebuilding of relationships, rebuilding of lives to achieve something that looks a little bit more like peace. And that is a reminder that peace is not merely the end of violence, it's the building of a more just world. And it's a reminder that that justice was not achieved through guns and bombs, but through relationship building. May the spirit of life and love hold us and all who are amid violence, so that we can build the relationships that are the foundation for a more loving, just, and peaceful world. Amen, and may it be so. This institution is supported by us, by our abundance and by our love, be that abundant treasure, abundant time, abundant talent. The passing of the plate is a moment to consider our own abundance, whatever abundance we might have, with gratitude, and to offer from it with generosity. Please give as you are able, and if it is your first time among us, please know that your presence is enough.
People all over the world.
Thank you very much. And I was looking out here and seeing a whole bunch of people around my age having a hard time sitting still through that. You are allowed to get up and do it. We do allow that. Okay. All right. Please join me in the blessing of this offering. This gift from the abundance of my life blesses me, our ministries, and the world. And now I have some important announcements. After today's service, please join us for coffee and fellowship in Cockrell Hall. All members and friends, and new people especially, which we have quite a few today, are invited to mingle over beverages and snacks post-worship. And after coffee and fellowship, families, parents, and children are invited to a family-style potluck lunch in Cockrell Hall. After lunch, children will play, and while they enjoy the company of other kids, parents will discuss parenting issues, parenting tips, etc. Childcare is provided by the church. This Wednesday, November 15th at 7 p.m., please join us in Cockrell Hall for a presentation by Eric Botts, the Director of Global Cybersecurity Program and Assistant Professor of International Studies at the University of St. Thomas. Mr. Botts will speak on the impact of artificial intelligence. It's a presentation you don't want to miss. This coming Saturday, November 18th, we're calling all volunteers to join us here at BAUUC for a fall spruce up and community garden workday. From 8:30 a.m. till 4 p.m., come out and join other church members for work and fellowship. No matter what your skill level is, you can contribute to beautifying our church grounds. Join us for the day or just for an hour or two. Also, this Saturday, November 18th at 4 p.m., is the first annual BAUUC Youth Friendsgiving in Cockrell Hall. Middle school and high school youths are invited to come and hang out together, play a game, bring a favorite pie to share, and even help bake a brownie. Appetizers will be provided. Next Sunday, November 19th, be sure to stay after the service for our Mercy Tree Lunch and Learn. You can experience the same delicious food that our BAUUC volunteers have been preparing each month for Mercy Tree to help feed Bay Area's houseless. Check the order of service insert and weekly briefs for the details. This next one is not on my list or on his list, but that is I want to remind you that we have a box in the back for gifts for children. Sonia Hernandez has sent along a message to me that she is worried that it's not getting filled. She asks that you please bring a toy, either new or in very good shape, used, to put in the box and so that we can get it sent out to the children. So please remember that. Also, if you're not on our email list, you can sign up on our website at bauuc.org. We send out an email of weekly briefs every Tuesday that contain these and many other activities that are happening in our church. Thank you.
There's a birthday cake.
Pardon me?
There's a birthday cake in Cockrell Hall for Katie.
Oh, I didn't even know. All right. Okay, can we sing now? Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Everybody.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Katie. Happy birthday to
All righty. In conclusion, let me see. Please join us in standing or seating as you're able for our final song, Gonna Lay Down My Sword and Shield. number 162 in the gray hymnal, verse 1 through 3.
May that peace which passes all understanding keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge of love. And may that peace be yours in the week to come. Blessed be, and go in peace.